Romans chapter 9 through 11. Today we are coming on the verge of the climactic conclusion of this whole section. Paul has been dealing with the question of how can Israel, God's chosen people, reject his message of salvation? How can Israel, God's chosen people, reject the gospel? How can Israel, God's chosen people, reject Jesus himself? In Romans 9, Paul explained that the rejection of the gospel was all part of God's plan. It focused on God's sovereignty. God never promised that God's chosen people would all be saved. Then chapter 10, Paul focuses on the responsibility of man. He talks about the Jewish rejection of the gospel. It's due to their own sinfulness. The Jews willfully and sinfully reject Jesus, and his focus is man's responsibility. Chapter 9 is God's sovereignty. Chapter 10 is man's responsibility. So we come to chapter 11. If the rejection of the gospel by Israel is due to their own sinfulness, and if it's all part of God's larger plan, then the question remains, is it permanent? Has God forever closed the doors on Israel? Have they once and for all turned their back on the gospel, never to return? This is the question that Paul has been addressing all throughout chapter 11. In the first 10 verses of chapter 11, Paul makes it clear that the rejection is only partial. Paul made this clear because it was very easy. He said, I'm a Jew, and I've accepted the gospel. And by the way, the apostles are all Jewish as well, and they have accepted the gospel. And the gospel writers tell us, and the writer of Acts, Luke, tells us that many, many other Jews accepted. And so Paul's point in the first 10 verses is that the Israelite rejection of the gospel is only partial. It's not complete. It's not total. He used the Old Testament example of Elijah, when Elijah said, I am the only one, God, who still worships you. I am the last of the people who love you, God. And God said, no. He sent a messenger to Elijah. He said, you don't know it, but there are 7,000 others that I have kept that did not bow the knee to Baal. 7,000 others who have not betrayed me. 7,000 others who still love me. And Paul was using that illustration to show that in that time, God preserved a remnant, and so too in Paul's time, he preserved a remnant. So not only is their rejection of the gospel partial, it's not complete and total, but it's also temporary. It's not permanent. The next 5 verses, 11 through 15, Paul explains that the fall of the Jews is only temporary and it has a purpose. Israel, like that woman in the commercial, remember? I've fallen and I can't get up. Israel has fallen, but will they get back up? Will there somebody come to help them? God said, God has allowed Israel to fall for a reason. They've fallen with a purpose, and ultimately, Paul is going to suggest and outright say that God will help them back up. They've fallen with a purpose, though. The purpose that they have fallen is so that the Gentiles might be brought into the fold of believers and ultimately as a mission themselves back to the Jews. So the Jews have fallen. Now this is kind of an interesting twist here. The Jews have fallen so that the Gentiles could be included, but also that the Jews might be recalled. Because by and large the Jews had rejected it. So in a sense they've fallen so that they might be called back in. And that's kind of weird to think about this. But remember the illustration that we used for this. The jealousy factor. Remember the kids with the toys? The kid has one toy, they're playing with the toys all together on the floor. There's a toy that's ignored over here. Nobody cares about that toy until one of the children decides they want to play with that toy. They walk over, they start playing with it. And then it becomes the most interesting toy in the universe for the other child. Nothing else will satisfy their need to play. And they say they need that toy. And they recall from years ago how that toy was given to them and it's their toy and they need that toy and it's theirs right now. The jealousy factor. And it doesn't stop when we grow up, does it? Think about teenage years. And the dating scene, and maybe you weren't interested in that one person until your rival was interested in them, and then suddenly they became much more handsome or more gorgeous, and they're far more interesting. And it doesn't stop in the teenage years, as adulthood. In the adult stage of life, the advertisers pay billions of dollars annually to play on your jealousy factor. They want you to see other adults who have things that you don't have. And with those things, they are very, very happy. And if only you had those things like those other adults had them, you too could be happy. I just love this new trash bag. Don't you want to go out and buy Hefty? Right? Because Hefty doesn't break when you carry it out to the trash. That big heavy bag. And they play on that jealousy factor. And God is using that. We have it in us. And God is using that to draw the people back to Him. So it's partial. It's temporary. Has a purpose. And finally, we know that Israel will get back up. We know that God will send somebody. They have pressed the alert button. I've fallen and I can't get up. And God is going to send a helper. God is going to bring them back. How do we know this? We looked at this last week. And we looked at verse 16 of chapter 11, where it says, "The dough offered as first fruits is holy, so is the whole lump. And if the root is holy, so are the branches." So what is Paul talking about here? It seems kind of strange. He's stepping back into Deuteronomy in the Old Testament, talking about the first fruits, the practice of giving the first fruits. But the practice of giving first fruits is a biblical way of acknowledging that all of something belongs to the God. When the Jews had a new lump of dough to make bread, they would take and they would break a piece of that dough off, and they would give it to the priests, give it in the temple, sacrifice it to God. They would give a small portion of the lump of dough, and that would become holy. And the idea was, if that piece becomes holy, the holiness is extended to the whole lump. If one portion of the dough is made holy, the rest of it is also made holy. And this idea pervaded all of the Jewish thinking. They did this with all sorts of things. They did this with all of the first fruits. When they harvested the grain, they brought in a grain offering. When they milled the grain into flour, they brought in a flour offering. When they harvested the grapes and made wine, they brought in a drink offering. Each of these things, when they had the first child, or the first calf born in livestock, or the first lamb born, was offered as first fruits. Why? Because then everything else that lamb, that sheep, that cow produces, all of the other children, the calves and the lambs that come out, are dedicated and holy to the Lord. So dedicating a small portion extends the holiness from that one bit to all of it. It pervaded all their thinking, even the firstborn children. When the Jews had their first child, they would take that child to the temple, and they would offer a sacrifice. In a sense, buying back the child that they're saying, God, this is your child. May we buy him or her back? And they would give an offering, and they would give their child back. Joseph and Mary did this. When Jesus was born, they went to the temple to dedicate it, and they made it a sacrifice. They're saying all of their stuff belongs to the Lord. All of their possessions, all of their food, even their time. The Sabbath was a dedication of time to the Lord. And if they give one day to the Lord, a small part of their week, the rest of the week also belongs to the Lord. It's just a way of acknowledging it, a way of acknowledging that all things belong to the Lord. And I hope that when you come here on Sunday, that you're doing that same thing. When you give your tithe, your offering, that's the same meaning to you. You give it to the Lord, knowing that this is a small portion, God, of what you've given me. Whether it be money, whether it be time, whether it be energy, whatever it may be that you're giving to the Lord, you're acknowledging that all the rest of that same thing also belongs to the Lord. Excuse me. I've heard some of you tell me that when you don't get to church on Sunday, the rest of your week is messed up. And maybe this is why. Because you haven't given the week to the Lord in the way that the Lord prescribes. The God-ordained giving of your time on the first day of the week, the Sabbath, the first few hours, Sunday morning, the first couple hours of your week, you give to God. Why? Because you're saying, God, the rest of my week is also yours. Use it as you will. But today, I will worship with my family together and dedicate it to you. This all comes, as I said, out of Deuteronomy 26 and other Old Testament passages, but they are offering the first fruits. So why is Paul bringing this up now? What in the world, what connection does first fruits have with the salvation and the redemption of Israel? Well, simply this. Paul is suggesting that the first fruits of Israel were dedicated by God to God. And if the first fruits were dedicated, then all the rest of Israel belonged to God as well. And if they all belong to God, Paul's conclusion is that God will not permanently reject them. So let's follow this train of thought. What were the first fruits of Israel? The first fruits of Israel were the patriarchs. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, who was later called what? Israel. The first fruits. And God went to Abraham and he said, you will be my child, and I will be your God. Your children will belong to me, and I will be their God. I will bless you. I will make your name great. I will make you great in all the nations. I will make you a blessing, and you will bless all the peoples of the earth. How in the world does one man bless all the peoples of all times across the planet? By bringing them the faith that brings salvation. God gave that faith to Abraham. God gave that faith to Isaac. God gave that faith to Israel, Jacob. And with each successive generation, he renewed that covenant. In essence, what Paul is saying is Abraham, Isaac, Jacob are the first fruits of Israel. They are dedicated to God. And if they are dedicated to God, all of Israel belongs to God. And therefore God will not throw all Israel away permanently. And he extended this metaphor from the batch of dough to the tree. And he said, if the roots are holy, so are the branches holy. If the roots are holy, that which comes out of the branches are holy as well. And he moved into this extended metaphor about the wild olive tree and the olive tree and the breaking off of branches. And it's kind of has many different parts to it. But he likened Israel to the olive tree. And he talked about grafting the wild olive branch onto the domestic olive tree. And do you remember we said that the wild olive tree doesn't really produce anything useful? Remember we talked about apples last week? And I said, how many of you like which kind of apples? We had Granny Smith, Gala, Crispin, John of Gold, York. And I said, well, how many of you like crab apples? And nobody really raised their hand. Why? Crab apples are like the wild apple. Can you eat them? Yes, you can. But they're not really great. You'd much rather have one of these other apples. And that's like the wild olive. It doesn't produce much of value. But the olive tree, I said, represented Israel. And the wild olive represents who? You remember? Us. And you all went home feeling like $1,000,000. Very encouraged. Oh, great. We're a useless wild crab apple. Some of us are more crabby than others, right, Walt? Yeah, so you're not going to finish that sentence. But what I didn't get to tell you last week, was that wild olive branch, when it gets grafted onto the olive tree, something amazing happens. So you have to understand how olive trees work. Olive trees get very, very old, hundreds of years, even 1,000 years, 2,000 years, some of them. And as they age, sometimes the branches stop producing olives. In the Garden of Gethsemane, there's a couple of olive trees, 1,500, 1,700, maybe even 2,000 years old, who were there during the time of Christ. These olive trees were on the Mount of Olives in the Garden of Gethsemane during the time of Christ. And maybe we were even witnesses to Christ's weeping on the night when he was betrayed. But as these trees age, the branches sometimes stop producing or get very diminished production. And what happens then is the gardener will come along and they will clip that branch and they will graft that wild olive branch onto the olive tree. And what happens then is something remarkable. The wild olive branch, because of the rich abundance of nourishment that the domestic olive tree roots are pulling from the soil, the moisture that it's pulling and feeding to that olive branch, that wild olive branch, will begin to produce olives like a native olive branch. It begins to make a produce that is worthwhile for the gardener, that is useful. The olives no longer are spindly and little and tasteless. They are plump and full, delicious and useful. And so the wild olive branch has a usefulness that it never had when it was off by itself. It gets transformed. That's us. You work on the day and say, oh, I feel a little better about being a wild olive now because God has grafted me onto his roots. But it's that attachment to the roots that Paul is really emphasizing. And Paul is saying, look, this is where you get your value, your attachment to the roots. And he's using this illustration to describe Israel. Israel was called to be an olive tree that was producing great abundance for the Lord. And they failed to do that. And when they failed, God cut them off and replaced them with a wild olive shoot, a branch that has been grafted on. Now, I have to make a correction. Last week, I described that tree as a tree of true faith. I think that's partially true, but I think it'd be more complete and more accurate to describe that tree as a tree of true witness. The tree of witness to God. Abraham and Isaac and Jacob were called to be God's people, not for salvation in themselves, but that they might bring salvation to others. Remember, Abraham's blessing was to bless the world. It wasn't to bless Abraham's descendants. They did get blessing, but the blessing was so that it could go out to the world, so that the faith could come to the world, so that he could explain who God was. The Jews were always called to be a witness. And so the olive tree, standing for the Jews, also stands for witnessing, for a witness. You'll find this in places like Zechariah 14. I studied Zechariah a couple years ago with the Recharge group. One of the visions, Zechariah had several visions, and one of the visions, the one that's recorded in Zechariah 14, describes two olive trees and a golden lampstand in the middle, between the olive trees. The golden lampstand, don't think of a light where you pull the switch, think of an oil lamp, kind of like when you rub and genies come out, and there's a wick that comes out of that, and there's olive oil in there, and the olive oil is the thing that burns to create the light, and there's this lampstand with 7 lamps on it, and these 2 olive trees, one on either side, and there's a pipe flowing into the lampstand with a never-ending supply of olive oil, meaning the lights are always burning bright. And remember the song, "This Little Light of Mine, I'm going to let it shine"? The witness is the lampstand. The passage in Zechariah describes the lampstand as God's eyes. God sees the world. And the olive trees on either side are providing the light, the olive oil, the source of the light on either side. The olive trees are the witnesses. You say, well, wait a second. I thought of God's eyes and witnesses. What's going on here? Remember in the Old Testament, 2 witnesses were required to verify any accusation. If there was one witness, it was just his word versus his word, or his word versus her word, or her word versus her word. 2 witnesses, though, will be used to verify something, 2 eyewitnesses. And so the olive trees stand on either side of the lampstand as 2 witnesses. And these witnesses serve a dual purpose. They do one thing, they witness about God to the world. They witness about God to mankind. But also they witness to God about mankind. They tell mankind about God and they tell God about mankind. God uses us. And when we go and we see things, we report them to God. And we call this prayer. We bring these things to God in prayer. We lay them at his throne and say, God, this is happening and this doesn't seem right. This wickedness is happening in the world and something should happen. God, why is this happening? God, I see this wonderful thing happening. Praise you. I see you working in this family. Whatever it is, we are witnesses. We tell God. And we are witnesses by telling other people. We are witnesses to God in prayer. We are witnesses to others in evangelism. We tell others about God. We tell God about others. And these olive trees stand on either side of that golden lampstand, supplying it with an ever-flowing, abundant supply of olive oil. These 2 olive trees, by the way, come back in Revelation chapter 11, I think. Chapter 11, verse 4. And these 2 olive trees, again, are standing on either side of the lampstand. And they are described with the term witness in it. They're described as witnesses for God. The Jews were the olive tree. They were called to be the witness to the nation. They were to be God's witnesses. When the Jews chose to reject Jesus, they lost their place as witnesses. They could no longer be the witness. Now remember, it's not a complete and total rejection of the gospel, just a mostly rejection of the gospel. The Jews mostly rejected Jesus. And when they mostly rejected Jesus, God cut off that branch and he grafted on a new branch. A branch that would bear fruit. And what fruit is God looking for in an olive tree? Witness fruit. He's looking for witness. He's looking for witnesses. The purpose of being grafted onto the olive tree was so that we would have nourishment, the nourishment of the root. Not so that we would feel good about ourselves, not so that we would be happy and enjoy our lives, not to make our lives easy or more enjoyable. The purpose that God has grafted us onto the olive tree to receive that valuable, life-sustaining nourishment from the root was so that we could produce fruit. That is the only reason a branch is put on a tree. That is the only reason a branch is grafted onto a tree, is so that it will produce fruit. And the Jews did not produce fruit, and they, even though they were God's chosen people, were cut off and they were replaced. There's a warning in that passage. There's a warning in that passage that we too are called to produce fruit. We are called to produce fruit, witness, testimony, spreading the good news of the gospel, talking about Jesus, sharing his goodness with all people. And of course, with that comes many blessings. It's very encouraging when somebody accepts the gospel. But the blessings are the perks, not the purpose. Too many Christians forget their calling to tell others about Jesus, to act as witnesses. Some assume that everybody knows already, and therefore they don't need to tell others about Jesus. The Bible says that the path to salvation is narrow, and few will enter it, and the path to destruction is wide and broad, and many are traveling down that road. We are called to be his witnesses, to use every opportunity in our lives to tell others about Jesus and declare his glory. The Jews failed to do this. Jesus cut them off. God cut them off. And he replaced them with a worthless, wild olive branch. But so long as we produce witness, we are valuable to the Lord. And he will cut us off when we don't. Listen to Romans 11:22. Note then the kindness and severity of God. Severity towards those who have fallen, but kindness towards you, provided you continue in his kindness. Otherwise, you too will be cut off. The Jews, God's chosen people, were cut off because they were not bearing witness to him. What's to keep us from being cut off if we don't bear witness to him? I'm afraid today in America, not very many people care about bearing witness to the Lord. We care more about Sunday afternoon activities. We care more about football, baseball. We care more about music. We care more about concerts. We care more about dinner. We care more about restaurants. We care more about the size of our house or the beauty of our house or the speed of our car. We care more about lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of other things. But God has grafted us on to his tree. And so long as we are sucking that nourishment from the roots, he expects something. He expects us to bear witness faithfully and joyfully. So long as we are being nourished by the roots, that is our call. And if we stop, he can replace us with another branch. I mean, it's not easy. And I think this has actually happened through history several times. If you remember that map I showed you last week? It showed the gospel moving through Europe and Northern Africa, but you remember most of those areas were red or yellow today? It's almost as if in Europe, which had the gospel powerfully, Martin Luther brought about the Protestant Reformation, we had Thomas Aquinas, deep thinking, but they lost it. They lost the witness. And it came to America. And in the beginning of America, we were powerful witnesses for Christ. But I think in recent years we have waned in our zeal. And there are other places that are picking up. Other places that are sending missionaries all around the world to be a witness. And many of those places are sending witnesses to us, to the U.S. Missionaries are coming here to proclaim the gospel. Why? Because many of us have failed to do that. We've missed our calling. And if we don't do that, we know what's going to happen. God won't waste the valuable resources, the nutrients from the root to feed a branch that is not producing anything. One day we will fail. One day we will. That's what the scripture says here. Not if we fail, we will fail at some point. We will eventually. That's what our passage says. And it says in our passage that another branch will be grafted in our place. And that branch will be Israel. At some point when the Gentile witness fails completely, I think that the Gentile witness is moving across the continents, and when it stops, it will return, and Israel will be grafted back on. But in the meantime, I'm going to do everything in my power to keep our witness going strong. And I want to encourage you to do the same thing. And say not, maybe this is a little chintzy or a little cliche, not on my watch. I've heard people say that, not on my watch. You are God's people. You are His witnesses. Not on your watch. Don't let the branch be taken off for failure to witness. Don't let God look at the branch of Christianity today in America and say, well, that branch isn't producing anything. We might as well cut that off and replace it with South American branch, African branch, some other branch. Not on my watch. Paul summarizes this, and this is all of Romans 11 so far. Paul summarizes it in the first 2 verses of our passage today. I'm going to end with that. So today, just be encouraged that we got all the way through up to the first verses of our passage today. But I felt that it was really important to review all this because Paul summarizes it in the first 2 verses as he describes Israel's hardening as a limited in scope and in time, in number and in time. Listen to Romans 11:25. Lest you be wise in your own sight. And Paul's all the time warning us through this chapter about our arrogance. Saying, don't be arrogant. They were cut off. They were cut off because they didn't witness. You can be cut off too. They were cut off for lack of faith. You can be cut off too. Lest you be wise in your own sight. I do not want you to be aware of this mystery, my brothers. And mystery isn't like a whodunit, isn't like a Sherlock Holmes, isn't like one of those things that we don't know. A mystery in Paul's mind is something that was not known in the Old Testament, but has been revealed in the New Testament. I do not want you to be unaware of this mystery, unknown in the Old Testament, revealed now in the New Testament, brothers. A partial, there's that part, that's that whole first 10 verses. A partial hardening has come upon Israel until, that's a time word, means it's not going to last forever, until what? The fullness of the Gentiles has come in. Until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And then listen. So at some point it is going to happen. At some point the Gentile branch will be cut off. And what? Verse 26. In this way, all Israel will be saved. That phrase, all Israel will be saved, has plagued theologians for centuries. It's been something that people have wrestled with. What does that mean? Does that mean every single Israelite, every single Jew is going to come to faith? What does it mean that all Israel will be saved? I think I have something that will help us to understand it, and we'll talk about that next time. Let's pray. Father, you have called us to be your witnesses, and that's what we want to do. As we have studied through Romans chapter 11, we have been asking the question, are you a faithful God? You promised that you would never forsake Israel, that you would never leave them nor forsake them, that they would be eternally your people. And Romans chapter 11 reminds us and shows us that the rejection of Israel is temporary, it's partial, and it has a purpose. It gives us the opportunity to be witnesses. It calls us into the faith that the Jews were supposed to bring to us. But secondly, as we witness to them, it is a chance for them to come back and know you, to love you, and to once again be your witnesses. So, Father, so long as we have that call in our lives, help us to fulfill it faithfully, completely, and joyfully. And we pray this all in Jesus' name.